Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. In 1994, Mauro Prosperi entered the 1994 Marathon of the Sands in Morocco. It was a 6-day, 150-mile event in the Sahara Desert, more than 5 marathons in a week. In 120-degree heat. Prosperi was an Italian police officer and an Olympic athlete, and on the third day of the race, a sandstorm hit, and Mauro became disoriented and got lost. This was before the days of GPS watches. He kept running, but further and further in the wrong direction. After his day's stock of water and food ran out, he was not found by the organizers or spotted by a search helicopter that passed by overhead. He almost died, but managed to last 9 days in the desert and was found by a nomadic family. He was 186 miles off course, had lost 30 pounds, and was on the verge of liver failure. His choice of which direction to run was fateful. Thankfully, by grace, he was found by that family. But we're continuing our series into the wilderness, and when you're in a place that feels foreign and desolate and distressing, you need to make choices sooner or later. And even no choice is a choice. When we're suffering from fear, stress, and disorientation, it's easy to lose our way. If we're going to navigate through difficult times and places, we need to ground ourselves in good information and set out in a direction that is consistent with our values. Today we enter into a brief episode in Jesus' ministry from Luke 13. He's traveling through the Galilee region with his disciples and engaged in teaching and healing. But he's getting closer to Jerusalem, and that's when some religious leaders come to him. They say, "Get away from here, because Herod wants to kill you." Jesus and the Pharisees often seem to clash over a variety of teachings like the Sabbath and other religious laws. So it would be easy to kind of hear their words and make them into a caricature and be skeptical about their intentions here. But the truth is, we don't know about any ulterior motives, and it makes sense to simply take them at their word and assume they actually care about Jesus and what's going to happen to him. Whatever differences they have with Jesus, they're giving him fair warning here. And it's a warning that we know is based in reality, and Jesus knows that as well. This danger that lies ahead in Jerusalem prompts Jesus to identify the time of choosing that's presented itself to him and to the people of Jerusalem. He says to the Pharisees, "Go and tell that fox for me. Listen, I'm casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day I must be on my way, because it's impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem." Jesus isn't going to change who he is or what he's about, what he's doing because of what's confronting him. He will remain faithful to his calling and mission. He acknowledges that he will face persecution at some future date, but that will not sway him in the meantime. Remember, he's drawing on his time of testing in the wilderness that preceded this. He's overcome hunger and questions of his survival already. He's turned away temptations to seize control of the world with his power and miracles, and he's refused to allow any inner doubts he may have to make his mission about himself and any need for inner affirmation. The courage that Jesus shows here is the result of already confronting questions of life and death and choosing to place what's right over what's convenient and good simply for him. And so he chooses here to once again stay true to his mission. It's not a choice that comes cheaply or easily, but it does demonstrate clarity. And then he highlights the choice before the people and leadership of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. These words have a prophetic quality to them. Jerusalem was a place where prophets had met their fates. They were people who challenged authority or spoke visions that were not accepted. Jesus speaks about his rejection by the people of Jerusalem as one that's already been made. Our best understanding is that Jesus died in 30 AD. It's important to note that many scholars believe Luke's gospel was written around 75 to 85 AD. This is important because Luke would have sat down to write these collected stories and teachings of Jesus after Rome's destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. This was a traumatic and catastrophic event for any time. And our primary historical source from that period comes from the ancient historian Josephus, who wrote about the Jewish revolt against Rome and its leadership, first in the northern countryside, including the Galilee region, and then in Jerusalem. Christian historian Michael White describes what that period after Jesus would have been like. He says the situation in Jerusalem was becoming increasingly tense through the mid-60s. This is the period of the buildup toward the first revolt against Rome. There was growing tension over the last few governors of the countryside. We know from Josephus that they were abusive and corrupted administrators, robbing the people in order to line their own pockets. Josephus also tells us that there's another source of growing tension in the country at this time, because there's an increasing number of bandit and rebel types coming out of the woodwork in the country. And so between growing banditry, the rise of the religious zealot movement, an insurgency movement, and then the corruption of the administration, the situation in Jerusalem is becoming very, very tense. And by the year 66, it would break out in a full-scale Jewish revolt against Rome. And we know by the year 70, Rome had laid siege to Jerusalem and destroyed it. Many people starved. Conditions were brutal before the final invasion. In the end, some 2,000 years ago, Josephus estimates that 97,000 people were taken prisoner and sent into slavery of various kinds. Another 110,000 were killed. You can imagine the depth of suffering and sense of loss for those who are reading Luke's gospel for the first time. And so all these years later, we hear the words of Jesus again with that prophetic quality which Luke shares in today's reading. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. Jesus doesn't name the specific danger that Jerusalem is facing in these words specifically, but we know some things about the teachings of Jesus, especially in this context of what we know happened in the years later. The expectations people had of him as Messiah to be a more militant revolutionary. Jesus never backed down from speaking what was true and right, but against even some of his disciples' assumptions, he chose to remain nonviolent to the end. We can hear his call to peace and to another way of life and imagine with later events that this represents at least one way his protection and wisdom was not embraced by both the leadership of Jerusalem and the people of the city. We can also think about the kind of spiritual peace and refuge that Jesus offers, the assurance of God's love and mercy, the hope and life that he extends to each of us in faith. And there's something we need to talk about in the way Jesus poses this choice to Jerusalem. He speaks in metaphor, presenting himself as a mother hen who offers protection to her brood, and it's, pretty remarkable because of its feminine imagery. There are a number of Old Testament passages that describe God in the image of a bird of some kind mothering her young, including in Deuteronomy, Ruth, and the Psalms. And in the Bible, as we know, God is most often referred to with male language, but we know that even in the story of creation, Genesis 1:27, we learn this. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Within both male and female, we find the image of God. Both embody unique qualities of God. According to the first chapter of the Bible, God cannot be expressed completely without doing so in both male and female. And so Jesus using the image of a hen is both in line with other scripture, but also helps us see a fuller picture of who God is. This image reinforces a notion of peace and motherly protection. And that said, if you watch videos of hens on YouTube or wherever you might find those, defending their chicks, you'll find hens can be pretty fierce if they're defending their brood. This image of Jesus as a hen protecting the brood is also clearly in contrast to Herod the fox. Foxes were often regarded as sly, cunning, and voraciously destructive. But I want to come back to the choice of the people of Jerusalem. Jesus is offering his peace and protection, but as Jesus sees it, they are not willing. They are faced with the proverbial wilderness of a society that was persecuted by the Romans, both in Jesus' time and after. They're faced with the hardship of life under this authoritarian rule in addition to all of the usual human adversity. Jesus is offering his way of life. He's offering a peace and a hope that springs from grace and mercy, from love of neighbor, love even of enemies, as we spoke about a few weeks ago. He offers a life in which all people are beloved children of God, where the vulnerable and excluded are brought under the protection and grace of God. It's a vision of shalom that we've talked about before, using the Hebrew word for peace. A well-being that is of mind, body, and spirit for individuals, but also shared across community and society. It's the kind of well-being we talk about here at All Saints in our vision. And on the other side, the fox, the powerful and voracious, seeks to scatter the brood and take what it wants. The fox represents a world in which fear and domination prevail. There is no mercy or peace, only supremacy. Herod is making his choice to rule as he sees fit. Jesus is making his choice to continue his mission of grace and love as he sees fit. And the people must make the choice between who they will follow. But more than that, how they will choose to simply live themselves. Each person in the time of Jesus and today has the moral agency to choose the path that they will follow. And so which path will we follow? Will we allow ourselves to be gathered under the wings of the one who cares for each one of us and every neighbor? We don't need to be a chick that steps out to take on the fox on its own. When we're overwhelmed, a common instinct is to isolate and disconnect and focus just on ourselves and what we're dealing with. But as we come together and dwell in the peace of God, which we experience in worship on the Sabbath, we can experience the well-being that God offers us, even when we feel like we're in the wilderness. There is peace and hope available to us even in barren places. May you welcome that as you come under the care and love of God, along with all of God's children. Amen. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.